Hi, in this video we will understand how to create CSS selectors that can be used on different automation frameworks such as Selenium, Testcafe, Cypress, webdriverio, among others. Welcome Geeks, I'm JoanMedia, and please subscribe if you want to keep learning about technology. So thank you very much if you do it, and let's go ahead to the content. Alright, as I told you before, today we're gonna have a very interesting video about how to create CSS selectors. As you can see, this slide says that it is it is focused or the target is for testers or automation engineers, because I think that for developers there is a lot of, or more selectors more important than these ones. But if you're a developer, you can go ahead and watch it. I have no problem. But that's the idea, to have a better understanding of how to use CSS selectors, why they are important, and let's try to understand them. So I think that it is going to be useful. So as you can see here, the video index is what is a CSS selector at first. Then we're going to have examples of how the ID, how to select an element using the CSS selectors in type, child, descendant, class, how to look for adjacent attributes, a specific match, and substring matches. Alright, so I guess that we can go ahead to the first topic, which is selectors or locators. Alright, so what are selectors or locators? Basically, in order to any web automation framework to click on an element, type into an input, for example, or emulates a mouse in or out, the tool needs to find the element. Alright, and in our case, we're going to take advantage of the CSS selectors to find a web element. As you can see here in this image, we have two basic components for or actually to create a CSS selector, right? So the first one is the anchor tag, which in this case is A, and we have an example of one attribute. In this case is href. So inside of the attribute href, we have the value google.com. So that's basically the structure of a CSS selector and how we can work with them. So let's continue with the first type of CSS selector that I think that it is the most common one, but it's important to review it. The first one is ID selector. Alright, as you can see, the syntax, that's how we use it. We just have to use the number symbol at first and then the ID name at the end of the expression. As we can read here, an ID selector help us to select an element based on the value of its ID attribute. There should be only one element given with a given ID in a document. Alright, that's something important to have in mind. It is unique, so it can be useful if you find an element with ID. It is gonna be an stable selector, I guess. Alright, so once this is done, let's look for an example in this web page, which is the internet.heroku.app.com login. Alright, this is the common website that we use in the channel, and I think it is simple, and we can keep things simple just having basic examples. You can think about any other scenario and apply these concepts in your real life scenarios, or even in an interview. Right, so let's see if I can find an element with ID. As you can see here, I have this div, which is a kind of a container, and it is gonna have all this stuff. For example, the button, it is gonna have all this text, it's gonna have the button, the inputs, and as you can see, it has the ID attribute with the value content. Even if I want to look for the value content with that particular attribute, I just have to come to the Google Dev console. So if you want to open that, you just have to come here, click on inspect, and you will be capable to open it. There is another shortcut, which is Ctrl+Shift+I, and you will be capable to open up that. So as I was telling you, if I want to look for an element and test that before you write down that in your test framework, you just have to come here, press Ctrl+F, and look for that particular ID. I don't remember the ID, I'm sorry. Let's see how was the name. ID content. ID content. And you will see that Well, right now I'm currently pointing to this div with the ID content. That's how you can select that particular div if you would want to do that. So that's the first CSS selector that we have in the presentation. Let's go ahead to the next one, which is the type selector. This type selector is useful to select all elements that have the given node name. All right, so we have an example here, which is input, and will match any input element that we have in the DOM. So for example, if I come here and I look for div, if I look for div, it is gonna come here and look for every single div that we have in the DOM. All right, that's an input selector. That's basically how it works. So let's give an example. If I come here and I combine the ID selector, I can do it without any kind of problem. I can look for content, and it is gonna be another selector. So you can combine a type selector with for example, an ID selector. There is no problem with that, and it is a good practice, I think. Or not. It depends on how your project works. So let's continue with the next slide, which is the child combinator. As you can see, the symbol or the syntax is A, this symbol over here, and B. All right, this combinator selects nodes that are direct children of the first element. So for example, it is if I look for the child of the UL element, it will match all the LI's elements that are nested directly inside that UL element. So that's something important if you want to look for a list and you want to get a specific element, for example. So let's try to make an example with the test page that I have here. I'm going to look for this username or this input actually. All right, I'm going to make that syntax or actually write down that syntax. I'm going to use the div and then an input. All right, I'm going to look for all the childs, or actually the children that are inside of a div. As you can see, I have two results, and if I click or enter again, we can see the two results that I have. So how could you specify if you want to select the input username or if you want to select the password input? All right, you can do it just specifying well, as I told you before, and a specific ID. In this case, let's say that I want to look for the password input, and that's how you do it. That's another way that you have to specify a specific child. That's good, right? So let's continue with another slide. Then the next one will be the Descendant combinator. All right, as you can see, there is going to be a space combinator selects, and it is going to select nodes that are descendants of the first element. As you can see here, the example div span will match all the span elements that are inside of div element. That's something interesting and something to have in mind, right? So let's go ahead and try to look for an example. And if I come here and look for div h2, let's see all the elements that have that combination. As you can see, there is only one element with this descendant combinator, but it is something that you can have in mind if you want to look for a specific pair of elements in your website. I'm not sure. For example, h4, I'm not sure if there is going to be more h4s than that. I don't think so. If I look for form, there is only one form. But you can I think that you can imagine how you can use this kind of selectors in your real life websites. I think so, right? So let's see if I think that it's enough. Just have in mind that this Descendant combinator is available for you. And if we look for the same example than before, div input, I think that we have a similar example with the child. We're currently looking for the input descendant of div. All right, so here we have the same result, and if we want to specify, for example, the input username, we can do it without any kind of issue. Yeah, there it is. I'm sorry, username. There it is. That's just different ways to perform a thing, right? So let's continue with another slide, which is class selector. That's good. Let me just drink a bit of water. Well, basically the class selector, it is going to help us to select all, or actually it selects all elements that have the given class attribute. All right, for example, in this case it is saying that it is going to look for all the elements with the class index using the dot as prefix. All right, it is going to it will match any element that has a class of index. So let's go ahead and try to look for an example of class here, and there it is, one class example. For example, this div, which is the same one than content with the ID content, has this particular class, large 2 columns. So if I look for this particular class and I'm gonna look for Control F, I click, or actually write down this class, and I point or actually add that as prefix, you will see that I'm gonna have 2 results. I have 2 divs with that particular class. So it is something that I have in mind. If you wanna play with the classes, that's another way that we have. Let's continue with the next slide, and it is gonna help us to understand how the adjacent sibling combinators work. Right? It is gonna use the plus combinator, so it will select adjacent siblings. This means that the second element directly follows the first, and both share the same parent. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look of an example. We're gonna look for the same example that we have before, which is div. Div input. In this case, I don't want, I'm looking at the UI. I need this in the console, div input. But in this case, I want to select the label instead of the input. All right. In this case, I have two different results, because we have two parents div, or two nodes div actually as div, and we have two labels as descendant elements, right? So let's imagine that I want to select in a specific the second one, the 4. I'm not sure. I think that the first one will be fine, right? So I think that I'm gonna be using another CSS selector that we have. I think that I can use this slide before, which is gonna be the attribute selector. It basically helps us to select all elements that have the given attribute. So let me give you the example. If I come here and I look for a specific label, but I want to look for the attribute 4 and the value username. All right, so how I can do that? Basically, I open the square brackets. I'm gonna look for the attribute 4, all right, and inside of 4 I'm gonna look for the string username. All right, and as you can see, I'm currently using the attribute 4 with the value username, and right now I just have one result with that particular attribute. So I think that is good, right? Once this is done, I'm gonna use another selector that was the original selector that I wanted to explain you, which was adjacent sibling combinator. All right, so how can use it? Basically, there is another way that I can select input in this case, and it is using that particular selector, the adjacent sibling combinator. If I write down the plus combinator and look for input, you will see that right now I'm currently looking for the input element. All right, so that's how you can use the adjacent sibling combinator if you have a kind of complicated selector without any kind of specific attribute. So that's another way that I can offer you, just to have in mind if you want to use it in your real life work or example. That's good, right? So we have covered adjacent sibling combinator right now, and I also cover attribute selectors. That's good. So let's continue. choosing a specific match. All right, that's another way I think that we could use to match, for example, this label. All right, let's just give you this example. Right now we have this combination, but I'm gonna use the child selector. Right now I have one child under the div, but two different scenarios with the same structure. Right, what happens if I want to select the first label and I don't want to look for the attribute for and the value username, or the attribute for and the value password? Well, I can use this another way, which is nth child, and specify for example the specific number of the node. Right now it is not working. Let me see why. And that's currently, or actually because and that's interesting, because right now I have well, the first child in the two scenarios. So how I can select the label that I want. In this case, I should change the nth selector to the div, I think. It is not working neither. That's so interesting. So let's see how I can do this. All right. What if I go beyond and I say that I want div? All right. And let's say that I want to look for this child. We are fine here, yeah. But let me see the structure. Why it is not working, man? Because it is inside. That's good. So what if I come here and look for, I'm sorry, I think that I'm messing around, but I want to give you an example of the nth child. Alright, this is inside of this div, right? And this row has this example. Alright. So if I look for the form at the start, then look for div as a child, currently I have two child nodes. That's right. And now if I, alright, right now I have this example. I hope that this works now. For example, let's say that I want to specify, or actually select, the input of the username or the input of the password. I can use the nth child again, and I hope that this time it works. And if you can see, I have two results here. I can specify that I want the first child, or if I want to use the second child. Right? That's it. That's how it works. So let's imagine that I want to specify the input of the password. So I place my selector in the second div, or the child, or the second child of the form, right? And there it is. So I just have to look for the div child inside of that div. And as you will see, I just have to come here and look for the label or the input. And that's another way, and a bit complicated, but just to have in mind that that can be possible, and in case you need it, that's how you can do it. That was a tough one, right? But we can continue working with another one. Thank you God. No, it's just kidding. I'm just kidding. Let's go ahead and look for another example here. All right, let me give you an introduction of the next slide, and the last one actually. And that's basically how the substring matches work. All right, it's a very interesting one. Let me just take a look of my notes here. All right, I'm fine right now. And that's another combination or possibility that we have using CSS selectors. Not only using Selenium. I guess that it can be used in any framework. That uses CSS selector as base. I'm sorry. All right. Well, as it is saying, CSS has an interesting feature to allow partially string matches. We can use these three patterns here. The first one is going to help us to match a prefix, all right? The second one to match a suffix, and the last one with the asterisk, it is going to help us to match a substring. It is going to work as a contains. Let's give you an example. All right, let's look for this text link, for example, and you will see that this text link is an A element with a target blank. All right, let's imagine that we have a lot of A elements. If I look for the selector A, it is gonna display a lot of A's, but it is currently looking for the word A. I'm sorry, the letter A. Well, let's imagine that we have a lot of A tags right now, and I want to only specify that I want to select the A tag that starts with the target and the value underscore. All right, how I can do that? Just this prefix underscore. All right, that's a very interesting question, guys. I'm gonna look for this. I'm gonna use this syntax, which is A square brackets, and I'm gonna look for the attribute that I want. All right, inside of the target, now I have to specify the prefix. All right, how I do that? Basically using this symbol and then equal. Then I just have to specify in ticks what is the value that I want to look as a prefix. Just specify underscore and you will see how magically it works. So it is a kind to create a kind of dynamic examples about a target. I just want to give you that example if you want to learn how to do that and you have a case that you have to use it. Let's imagine that I want to specify and actually look for the tag that ends with the letter K. All right, and let's look for the prefix, or actually the suffix K. All right, so I just have to change the symbol here to be a dollar symbol. All right, and now I just specify the letter K, and you will see how it works too, because that's another possibility that we have. Now imagine that I want to look for any A tag that has the attribute target, but it contains the letters A and N as blank. All right, let's imagine that I want to look for AN, but in this case we have to use the asterisk symbol, and that's how you will be capable to select any A tag with the attribute target that has the AN substring inside of the value. And that's it, guys. I guess that right now we have covered all the topics that we have for this presentation, and I hope that it works for you. Thank you very much for watching this video. Hope that you subscribe if you want to keep learning about automation and technology in general. Actually, thank you very much. This was JoanMedia, and see you in the next one. Bye bye. Thank you.